Like a 2 hour goal this morning. And my insurance has like a ton of options in it, like they're just, no one's accepting patients.
Okay, I would like to call the meeting of the Planning Board for February 13th to order. My name is Lucy Bisson, and I'm the chairperson of the Planning Board, and I welcome you all here. And I ask Christine Kittredge to read the take the roll.
Roger Dupre.
Here.
Joshua Najin.
Here.
Michael Marcotte.
Present.
Shanna Cox.
Here.
Lucy Bisson.
Here.
Myself, Christine Kittredge, is present. Amy Smith.
Here.
And Alex Pine.
Here.
And for city staff, we have Shelley Norton, Deputy Director, City Planner, David Hediger, Director, Planning and Code Enforcement, and Linda Tripp, Administrative Assistant. Thank you. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Not from staff, no.
Okay. There is correspondence, and this is a letter from our mayor, who was planning to attend, but has now tested positive for COVID, so he has graced us with not his presence. So he asked me to read his comments, so I'm going to do that now. Dear Chairperson Bisson and committee members, please recommend that the City of Lewiston renew the purchase option with Lewiston Housing Authority to allow LHA to continue development of affordable senior housing at the former Martel School site. I contend that there has been no valid reason provided, either stated publicly or in executive session, that would warrant the drastic action of selling the property to a different buyer. On the contrary, LHA has spent considerable resources and time thus far and stands ready to develop the property. LHA has proceeded in good faith, and the city's credibility would be placed in jeopardy if we fail to renew the option to purchase. Developers value consistency and predictability. The City of Lewiston is not served by the current council changing direction in this manner. This will create doubt for developers and weakens the city's bargaining position in the future. We need strong developer relationships, and we need affordable senior housing. LHA is a partner in success not just for the Martel site, but across the entire City of Lewiston, and should be allowed to purchase and develop the property. Thank you for your time and service. Sincerely, Carl Shaleen, Mayor. Okay, we have public hearings. So the Planning Board recommendation to the City Council on the Lewiston Capital Improvement Plan. And let's see. Shelley, would you read your recommendations for us, please?
Certainly. So, as is done every year, the city is in the process of moving forward with the capital improvement plan for fiscal year '24, and it's required that this board provide a recommendation to the council on this, since it's over $100,000 in spending. On January 20th, you received by email and also in your packet a response to questions that various members of this board had posed on the LCIP, as well as other board members. It was a joint set of response to questions. In addition, on February 1st, the Public Works Director provided a summary on the Public Works complex items that are located in fiscal year '24 of the LCIP. That's also attached to this memo. At our last meeting on January 30th, you reviewed the LCIP with City Administrator Heather Hunter. She gave updates by department on certain items that would be possible to push out to a further date based on updates she'd received from various staff and further looking at that. So, as you're aware, there is a large discrepancy between the number of requests and what they total for a dollar amount and the available funds, which is pretty typical every year. So you're asked to make a recommendation to the City Council and to provide any comments that you want, any reductions or elimination of project funding suggestions that you might have. And then the memo has the action that would be necessary to take for you to move that forward. So I did want to point out that staff does need to provide those comments to council this week. Typically, we have things by Wednesday submitted to go to them. So they will be voting next Tuesday. So this is the night where you really have to make a decision. We can't postpone this decision.
Okay. Shall I go across the board of the board to have people tell me what they think we should do? We put in our recommendation? Roger?
After looking at everything that's in here, I think everything that we discussed is adequate as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I'm not sure I know what you mean by everything we discussed.
Well, when Heather highlighted everything,
Oh, okay, right.
yeah, and
Okay.
we've got the printout of what it is,
Mm-hmm,
then I feel everything that she explained is adequate.
okay. Josh?
I would concur with that view. I would say that I am concerned with bonding when interest rates are as high as they are. So basically, some of these projects can't truly be halted, and us can just continue holding the needs that we have in our community, and then some of them as, excuse me. Yep, sorry for that. So some of these projects, we absolutely need to continue at this point in order to meet the needs of our community. And some of them, as Heather had indicated, could be paused, and I'm comfortable with that.
Right, and one of the things that she did mention as well, even though things are committed to be bonded, the bonds are not going to be issued for a couple of years, so interest rates may have gone down in a couple of years, they may have gone up. Hopefully, they'll go down. And so that makes a difference. They're very careful as to when they do set up the bonding. Thank you, Josh. Michael?
I'm also concerned with the bonding, and I'd like to make a couple of recommendations. One would be to stay within the 80% guidance that's in ordinance. I believe it's in ordinance. I'd also like to steal a little bit of the chair's thunder.
No problem.
There's a memo that went out to the entire board with some recommendations. I agree with all 8 of them, but I do have a question on number 4 for staff. The Samad Payne and Sunnyside Park trail extensions, does that have anything to do with the other agenda item tonight with Oxford Street rear?
I don't think so. Oxford Street rear is behind the Continental.
Yeah, but is that part of the Samad Payne trail extension?
Just a second, Mike, while I turn to that page. That's, for those following, that's on page 82 and 84 in their LCIP if they brought it with them. Specifically, 82 is the Smart Park extension. That was working with the trail going from where the new fitness center is, kind of by the Hampton Inn, going underneath the bridge over to Veterans Park.
So
it's
nothing-
not related to 64 Oxford Street rear and any trail discussion
Okay.
on that side.
So I'd be fully supportive of all 8 of these recommendations. And understanding that that doesn't even make
Oh, no.
a huge dent to get to under the 80 percentile. Have to put faith that the finance director and city administrator has the ability to find more savings somewhere. Because bonding is a real issue, and I don't think that those interest rates are going down anytime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Shanna?
Thanks. It's nice to be in such alignment with my fellow planning board members. I agree with all of the chair's recommendations as well. The only note that might be offered as a recommendation that you might pass on, the Bates Mill number 5 brownfield cleanup that's slated for $1 million was one that I think Administrator Hunter also recommended, but that be waylaid until we see if there's additional funds that are available before bonding for that. So that's one area that I had a note. The Ali sculpture you'd already mentioned, but to put that out a year until there's some more clarity on the configuration of that particular site. And I guess I don't know if it's a clarifying question so much as a note, but the fueling station design and construction under Public Works is in alignment with another conversation that's happening kind of parallel about one of 4 options from the planning for the best use of space and facilities for Public Works. And so that's one I would certainly hold off on bonding or approving until we're confident in all of the final locations of all of the physical spaces for how Public Works might be laid out, given the options that are in front of us. And then kind of at large, I would just like to say that I really appreciate that economic development and the city Public Works did a really great job showing us 5 years of planning and taking notes from prior years from this board, and that we'd continue to like to see that effort installed at the airport and with the superintendent of schools in their planning efforts.
Thank you. Christine?
I'll continue the agreement with the items that you recommended, Lucy, and with Shanna's comments as well.
Okay. Amy?
I also agree. Thank you for sending that out in advance, and Shanna, thank you for the additional comments.
Okay, Alex?
Well, I'm going to make a couple of comments on your recommendations.
Absolutely.
I agree with them,
No,
sort of.
You can disagree.
In principle, I think it makes sense, right? We have a budget to balance. You can't have everything. But I would like to just offer up for the room, just as points. One, for item 3, reducing the number of vehicles purchased for Public Works, the pickup trucks. Electric pickup trucks can offer significant operational savings over the lifetime of the vehicle. So perhaps it would make sense to look at biasing towards a newer technology like that that could offer lifetime operational savings for the city. Additionally, for item 4, I get that, trails are often not the most important thing in a community, but I think they do have a pretty big effect on getting people to invest in this community and move here. Certainly, that's what convinced me, was actually the Sunnyside Trail. I was on the fence about moving to Lewiston until I walked the Sunnyside Trail, and I said, this feels like home. So those little things can make a big difference.
Okay. Thank you. And to clarify that point, my feeling is the one with Simard Payne Park, it's to be combined with the new water pipe. So, let's keep it off the books for now and put it in with the water pipe. And then Sunnyside Park, can, when there's something else going on, especially if we're doing the Xanton project with Pineland, then the Sunnyside Park would be more economically viable, perhaps. That was my logic behind the way I was doing it. Okay, in that case, do we want to make Michael?
Make a motion?
Yes, I was just going to ask for one.
Make a motion pursuant to Articles...
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Could you open a public hearing first?
Oh,
Ooh, I am so sorry. I will open up for public to speak. When you come up to speak regarding this item, you will please go up to the podium, give your name and where you live, and you have 3 minutes to speak on this one item. You can speak more than once on each item, but only once per item, okay? So if anyone wants to speak on the LCIP, what we're discussing right now. it's not the Martel School.
It's the Lewiston Capital
Improvement. Okay. So if anyone wants to speak, I would welcome you to please step up. Okay, in that case, I will close it to the public, and I will entertain a motion.
Could I ask a question first?
You sure can.
Back to the Samad Payne and Sunnyside Park. I guess my mind was kind of going two different directions at the same time until I heard Alex speak. So my understanding is that there's, you said sewerage?
No, it's the redundant water pipe that's
Water
going to
pipe.
be coming underneath the Longley Bridge.
Along the bridge, and that's not scheduled till when?
I think it's supposed to go out to bid this year.
So probably 2025.
Right, I'm not sure when actual construction activity is gonna commence, but the intent with that is when they do the pipeline construction under there, that there'll essentially be this access road path for purposes of doing the construction that we can kind of piggyback on for purposes of making trail improvements.
So there wouldn't be a need to bond this before 2025?
That's probably right, Mike. I don't know for sure, but that's probably accurate.
Because the reason this one item caught my attention is part of the reason this board exists. Planning and oversight on what's going on at the riverfront.
Right.
And it's nice to have something going on at the riverfront every year. And that leads me to another question, hopefully quickly. Is there something happening there this year for investing into the riverfront, Samad Payne Park?
I was just going to say that Public Works has had some projects that they had put on hold specifically because planning asked them to because of the work being done in the master plan. So, you know, once we have the master plan finalized, which should happen in March, I think at this point it's likely that the plans they had for this construction season will take place in the spring of 2024, not in 2023. So there will probably be a series of things next year and the following year happening, and this year they'll be designing.
And those
out some
projects have
elements.
probably already been approved for bonding.
Some of them, like they have money allocated for an extension where the train station kind of pathway that's got the grasses. So there was an extension of that was to come into the park, but because of questions about access and parking and how was that going to be reconfigured, they put a hold on that.
Okay.
So I believe that may be an element that they would move forward with sooner of the master plan, but probably I'm thinking at this point, no construction this year. Is that what you're
Yeah, I'd say it's
sensing?
accurate. I mean, there's some maintenance that's occurring down there. The Red Shop, I believe Heather spoke to that. I mean, we just need to make some maintenance repairs to that in hopes of something bigger and better happening long-term down there. And there's just some overall maintenance to the canals as well. You folks are probably aware that they put a boat ramp, so to speak, into the canal down behind Museum LA. There's some infrastructure that still needs to be removed as part of that. So there's some ongoing maintenance type things, not necessarily the attractions maybe to line up with Alex's comments about getting people excited, but it's kind of just behind the scenes things that need to occur just for us to keep the things functioning down there.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4E of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation for the City Council's consideration of the adoption of the fiscal year 2024 Lewiston Capital Improvement Program, with the recommendations outlined in the Chair's memo, 8 items, and to include 9 and 10, if I counted correctly, that Shanna Cox has suggested.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Roger, is there further discussion? Roger Dupree,
Yes.
Joshua Najin,
Yes.
Michael Marcotte,
Yes.
Shanna Cox,
Yes.
Christine Kittredge,
Yes.
Amy Smith,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. Next item is other business. A planning board recommendation to the city council for the disposition of 860 Lisbon Street, Martel School.
I'll note that Lincoln just ran upstairs to get an additional document, so
Okay,
buy him a minute here.
sure.
And actually, if I could ask for clarification from the board before we move on. So the two items, 9 and 10 from Shanna, I have a couple of notes here. One was about Bates Mill 5. One was agreeing to hold off on the Muhammad Ali sculpture. One was regarding the fueling area for Public Works. So those three, what's 9 and what's 10, if we could just clarify, is it Bates Mill and then the fueling
Yeah,
area?
she added a couple of things, she's looking them up.
You can make item 9 the two economic development items of Bates Mill number 5 and the Ali sculpture, and number 10 can be the Public Works fueling station.
Isn't the LE structure already in?
The Ali statue is already part of my comments. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll wait for Link to come back.
Sorry. Yeah, I could certainly do that. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the recommendation on the disposition of 860 Lisbon Street, which is the former Martel School. So the board discussed this at your last meeting and made a decision to table for this meeting for further discussion, as well as you had some questions that you wanted some clarification and response from staff on. But just as a point of background, this project does require a recommendation from the board to the council on the disposition, which is standard for any purchase or disposition of any property that the city might hold. The items that you asked for at your January 30th meeting to have staff bring tonight included a request that there be additional cost estimates, if available, regarding the remaining asbestos remediation. So at the last meeting, Lincoln Jeffers mentioned that there was a report that was about 7 years old that the school department had, that he hadn't been able to get a copy of yet. So that was one thing you were looking for. The second was to get a sense for the cost of demolition debris disposal, as that was part of the agreement with the potential purchaser, that the city would pay for that cost. And then finally, to get a better feel for what the current market value, if anyone was to sell it, not just the city, on the open market, what would it typically be listed for? So those were the three things that you asked for. There was a memo provided in your packet from Lincoln Jeffers providing response to those questions. I will let him address that when he gets here. Hopefully that will be just a minute now. So,
Do you guys want to start discussing this before he comes back, or should we wait till Mr. Jeffers comes back?
Do we know what he was bringing back?
A document.
Yeah, some document.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to get loaded for bear, I think, so.
It could be.
Hopefully it would be germane to.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's going to be germane to what we're talking
That
about,
would be good,
yes.
right, yeah.
Yeah, so,
I'm not scared to start discussing it.
Sure.
Because unless he's bringing some, whatever he's bringing, there's
Oh,
there's items in front of us we might discuss.
Okay.
Is that appropriate?
absolutely. I think it is.
May I dive in?
You surely may,
Is that
Ms.
right?
Cox.
I'm just going to start with some math, if I can. So one of the items that we discussed was essentially fair cost, right? And so just to kind of pull these numbers together and see if we can get in agreement on how we're reading those numbers, I think is a
Sure.
good starting point.
Yep.
So one of the requests is for us to dispose of it at the cost of $400,000, so $400,000 income to the city, minus the cost of tipping fees, which we have estimated in front of us.
There's really no estimate.
So there's,
The 100.
Nope, so this is why I wanted us to talk about it. The environmental mitigation, so the asbestos is
50 to 100.
50 to 100, and so that's not counted. And then the tipping fees is not counted in the estimate provided by the assessor of 150. So essentially, they're saying fair market value of the land alone is, well, the assessed value of the land alone, we won't call it fair market. The assessed value of the land alone is 260. If you add in the expected $150,000 that Gendron's supposed to pay, right, then we start to get pretty close to that 400 mark, right? And then the city is paying for the tipping fees and the asbestos removal.
Right, but
Does that make sense?
fair market value is that.
Correct.
That's the assessed
So Lucy's
value.
pointing out that fair market value is 700 to 900, and that we would expect, anyone paying that would expect to negotiate with the seller to remove the 150 in construction costs, the 50 to 100 in asbestos removal, and then the 50 to 100 in tipping fees. Right, so I'm just making sure we're all on the same page with math numbers,
I think
which
so.
is $400,000 is a good deal, but it might not be the steal that we thought it was, because it really comes in about 200 less than fair market.
The tipping fees, unless I'm misreading it, I thought they're saying around 60K for that, not 100?
Well, they're saying that with the tonnage for Pettingill School, adjusting for the size of the building would probably be around 60,
Okay, so we're talking 60 for the tipping,
plus 50 to 100.
50 to 100 for asbestos, whatever that may be.
Well, let's say 100, let's
Yeah, say
be
160.
worst case.
And then demo is another,
No, demo is Mr. Gendron will be taking
well,
care
no,
of
no,
that.
I'm
But
just
fr-
saying
if we
just
go
in
down
general.
from the
Just in
700,
general.
Okay.
then one would expect,
Yep.
So about
Purchase or-
300,000.
Yeah.
He is.
If someone was
which
paying
brings the
for all of that.
700 of fair market down to 400.
Yeah, or the, 900 down to, what would that be?
6.
6.
Yeah. I just wanted to get on the same page with numbers, because I figured that was just data and facts, and made useful time of Mr. Jeffers' ability to get upstairs and down. Welcome back.
Mr. Jeffers, take a breath.
Learn them all, but I know exactly where they are.
Of course, of course. Take a breath, and the floor is yours.
Okay, so, and my memo, I think, my memo addressed the questions that were raised at the last meeting. As far as asbestos removal, most of it has come out as under the school department's watch. What is still unclear is how much may remain in the building behind walls or in the ceilings and whatnot. And until we do a environmental assessment of the property to determine how much it is. So, but based on past experience, Alan Ward, who's the city's purchasing agent, extrapolated what we did down at the Pettingill School to this, accounting for the difference in size, and just ballparked that it'd be somewhere between 50 and 100,000, perhaps, if we needed to do the, once we've done the study, we'll know that's about a 10 to 15,000. We've already requested the study, and then it's the removal. So all in would be no more than 100,000 is what's anticipated, and hopefully less. I came in just as you were discussing demolition, and it really looks like the numbers are in that Dave Gendron had estimated all in would be about a $300,000 if he was bidding on it. And looking at what we would incur, there's a chance that most of the brick and masonry, which is heavy, will be able to be deposited and reused is really the intent. So it's really just the drywall, wire, that type stuff, and that would need to be paid for tipping fees. So, and we had approached that, thought that would be about $60,000, and then Bill Healy, the city assessor, I know you had asked me to go to a broker, but I can get Bill Haley to give me an answer very quickly, and Bill knows every sale that happens in the city. So I asked him, and then with the same morning, he got back to me with his estimate of value, on the market value with the building down, that he thought it would be in that 700,000 to 900,000 range.
Okay.
Was there something you went upstairs to add?
I'm sorry?
you had gone upstairs for an item. Was there something that you had wanted to share? Everything you just shared was in our memo, and I think the numbers we agreed to while we were waiting for you. Was there something else?
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
brought?
no, I mean, it was really, so I apologize that Linda and I were discussing, she's like, you got time, run upstairs.
If you have new information, I just want to make sure we're not missing it before.
We do not, no.
Okay.
That's more for the broader public. Yes, everything was in my memo.
Can I
Absolutely,
May I?
continue,
Um,
please.
So I think one point of discussion is the price a fair price? And I think the second point of discussion, as Mayor Shalene brought forward, was the process a fair process, leaving us with the options described at our last meeting, which is that there is music,
Whose
right?
phone?
Yes.
Okay, seems to have been quieted.
There's, I think we were presented, and I guess I just want to check with city staff to see if I'm understanding it. But at our last meeting, we were option one of the original options that this planning board reviewed years ago, was for LHA to have a project on the property. And at our last meeting, it seemed as though we were being presented that that was not an option. And I'm just checking, both from a process point, we've been encouraged to reconsider LHA. We were told by Mr. Jeffers at our last meeting that there was not an option we could consider based on city council. And so before our discussion gets too broad, what are the options before us today?
Yeah. So your recommendation to the council isn't based on a specific proposal before the council, but you can certainly, in your recommendation, make suggestions to the council. So there's no guarantee that you give a positive recommendation that it is Gendron's proposal that they would go forward with. They're not bound to do that. Likewise, they aren't bound by a suggestion from this board that they work with Lewiston Housing instead, for example. But you certainly can make suggestions with your recommendation.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions, comments regarding this? I see your head nodding, Josh. Would you like to?
Yep, certainly. So just quickly, first I do want to thank fellow board member, planning board member Cox for really being succinct in the request that we were asking for, so that we could come back and have something to actually decide upon. The things that I'm slightly concerned with are just, if administration and staff is suggesting that we should relinquish the property, I'm fine with that. I think that the LHA plan was an actual plan, whereas moving forward to sell a property at under its value while not being promised any housing is challenging. It doesn't necessarily adhere to the comp plan, depending on what happens with that space. That entire intersection has regressed in the past 10 to 12 years. It's become very dangerous for pedestrians. There's, and again, coming back to the comp plan, adherence to the comp plan, looking at ways in which we could possibly put that property on the open market with economic development in order to obtain senior housing if LHA can't move forward. And from what I had heard in the last discussion, our economic development director was saying one thing, and the representative for LHA was saying a slightly different thing. So, ultimately, I'm fine with releasing the property, but I want to do the smartest thing that we can do for our community and for housing and for our seniors. So,
Anyone else have any? Yes, Alex.
I just wanted to ask the rest of the committee members here, or board members, about the memo that we got from Lewiston Public Schools. So that does, I think, weigh into this decision of whether or not we want to release it for sale, regardless of who it gets sold to. In terms of how that works from a procedural standpoint, it sounds like they're advocating for the city to maintain ownership of it until they think of, or come up with a plan, a potential plan for reusing it, or redeveloping the site. Is that correct?
That's how it reads to me as well.
Okay.
I don't agree with them. Personally, I think that it is not the best and most effective use of that piece of property. There is lots of land in Franklin pasture where Lewiston High School and the Connor Elementary is. I think it would be a more advantageous to put the offices and perhaps a multi-grade middle school-ish kind of thing, whatever kind of discussing, would be more there than it would be on that very busy intersection that I don't think is conducive to having children. I mean, there were children there for 50 years, or more, but it's not a good place. That's my opinion. Shanna?
Yeah. When Administrator Hunter asked the question at the end of our last planning board meeting, I was pretty specific in how I felt then. I'm happy to go on the record again. But in addition to safety, which frankly I have significant concerns about seniors being housed on that same property and their safety, not in a way that precludes my desire to see senior housing built there, but in a way that says I really desperately hope that that's linked to pedestrian improvements, which would happen for any economic development, save a box drugstore with lots of parking that might go into that lot. So either way, there should be pedestrian improvements that ensure the safety of any residents of that property, whether they're daytime or full-time residents. That said, that is a prime site for economic development and to spur economic development in the areas that Planning Board Member DeJean has already referenced. And so I think the use and desire by the school department to see any type of capacity retained within city hands should not be from that site, period. And there is some great spaces at Longley and Franklin Posture that I would highly recommend, but no.
Okay. Michael?
Though I may agree that that's not a great site for putting students, I'm not so sure that putting another complex at Franklin Pasture is either, because when you have a lockdown, you're going to have a lockdown of nearly the entire school system of Lewiston.
True.
No, that was my concern with locating the Connor School on that property. And Shannon brought up something that reminded me, and I might even have it now with me, but I'm not going to dig through my satchel. I believe that there was an attempt, maybe the chair can remind me, there was an attempt to rezone that property not too many years ago, and it got a resounding negative recommendation from the planning board, and it didn't happen. And the concern was, and one of the questions that I believe was asked from a planning board member at the time was, if we went to this zoning, would it allow a Dollar Tree type of store to locate? The response was yes. And the individual kind of sat back in his seat and said, well, I'm against that. And that's a concern that I think some of us have. And I don't want it to progress towards that by tonight's actions and future council actions. If that eventually happens, it becomes another corner with more retail space. We have underutilized retail space in Lewiston as it is.
Okay. Amy?
My big concern is I don't understand why the option was not extended, and I would love to get an explanation so that we can, if there's a good reason for that, I'd like to know what that is. In terms of disposing of the property, I agree that it has some great uses that are better than a school. And in order of disposition, I would go, my personal preference is number one, extend the LHA proposal. Number two, put it out to an RFP where people need to say exactly what they're going to be doing with the site. And number three, accepting the 400 would be the bottom of my list.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
A rookie question here. The zoning, I guess this is directed towards staff. What is the current zoning for the lot, and what's permissible under that zoning?
Not a rookie question. We do not have all lots memorized in the city. You're doing great, Alex.
I already
Nor
got
does
like
staff, for the
3/4 of
record.
them, so.
Nor does staff. We always have to check.
No, and actually, luckily, I put this in my memo, so I don't have to go search it up. But, so it's located in the office residential zone, and then there was discussion, and Alex, this was right before you joined the board, on December 10th, the council and planning board had a joint meeting where they workshopped potential zoning changes to this corridor and also Main Street. And at that work session, the discussion was to move to a community business zoning district there. So that will probably be coming before your board on the 27th, so the next meeting. And then potentially to the council in March, depending upon if you move it forward on that night. So that's the proposal. I can look up for you and kind of read a few examples of how they're different. Certainly, community business has a much wider suite of uses that are allowed than office residential, which is very much broadly limited to office-type uses and residential uses. But give me just a moment here.
Are there any form restrictions to office residential, like some of the other zoning districts?
Is it covered by design, Lewiston?
No.
Yeah, so regardless of which zoning district it is, that location doesn't have more detailed design standards. There are some standards that apply citywide as far as street trees and that sort of thing. So let's see, so community business allows uses like restaurants and drinking places with a conditional use permit where office residential does not. Allows hotels, motels and inns, movie theaters, places of indoor assembly and amusement, arts and crafts studios, personal service shops, and retail stores. And those are all uses that are not allowed in office residential except for the personal services. Office residential is primarily business and professional offices. And then we can look at what residential uses compare. Office residential allows a number of residential uses that community business does not. So for example, in office residential, you can have a single-family home, a two-family home, and then there's a number of different types of residential uses, so attached single-family, so like townhomes, mixed residential where you have like single-family and townhome kind of on the same parcel. And whereas in community business, the only sort of overlap for residential is that you can have multifamily in community business. So those other uses, if they already exist in community business, would be a non-conforming use allowed to move forward, but you couldn't, build those going forward now.
So just to make it clear, the current zoning would allow for professional offices and sort of service-based businesses. It would allow for single-family duplex and townhome forms. It would not allow for like a dense apartment building.
It does allow multifamily.
Oh, it does allow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it allows kind of just about everything where the community business is just multifamily.
Gotcha. Okay, so you could have one or two housing units,
Which
or you
with
could
that
have.
site, I would imagine it would be multifamily. It would be less likely to be a single family or even townhomes, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Josh?
density is probably different as
That's
well.
what I was going to ask.
Yep.
Density. Yep.
She's getting real good at this.
Let's take a peek.
While you're peeking.
So with a, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Got it. So
Okay.
community business is 2,000, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square feet. Office residential is one dwelling unit for 3,000 square feet. So there is a greater density with community business.
Okay.
And the opportunity for some mixed-use commercial first floor with upper residential in a way that, like, unless that commercial is an office space on the first floor, you're not going to get a restaurant or a pub on the first floor with housing above in the office residential.
Right.
I didn't catch the square footage numbers. Can someone remember?
Yeah, it's 2,000 for the community business per unit, and it's 3,000 for office residential per unit.
Okay. Is
So
there,
there's more
actually-
density in the
Yes.
commercial
Yeah.
than the office residential.
what?
It's
with
the flip of that, though. It's for every 2,000 square feet of parcel, you can have a unit.
Yes.
So they're allowed.
It's
Yeah.
not a 2,000 square foot
No,
unit.
no,
Okay.
totally. So I was wondering, I think we have sort of a rough acre size here. Like, how many units can we physically get on the site right now?
I bet there's someone in
Current
the
zoning.
audience that's actually done a site plan to do the math on that.
Well, LHA was proposing 44,
44 units, okay.
44 units.
And just to put a fine bow on Alex's great line of questioning, in addition to understanding the difference between how it's currently zoned and how it could be zoned, the other important piece is to name that even with a disposition on the 21st, likely any planned development would happen under the new zoning, whatever that is. A decision still to come.
If it's changed. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I know this is not a public, yeah, Shelley, did you want
If
to
you
say
would like to know the difference,
Sure.
okay, so let me just do that for you. So with 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit, that works out to be 46 units. And with 2,000, that works out to be 69 units.
Okay, so 23 units more in one than the other. Okay, this is not a public hearing, but I am going to open it up to the public. If you wish to speak, go up to the podium, state your name and where you're in your address, and you will have one time to speak, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. So I'm opening up to the public. Go.
Tim Gallant, 533 Webster Street, Lewiston. We'll address 3 quick items. Item 1, with the pedestrians, I researched it today. There've been little to no pedestrian problems in that area. And if you think about it, across the street, unless they're going to buy glass, where are they going to go? We've made a storage unit out of the other facility. The gas station's been closed for over 5 years. They could go to Burger King. So as long as there's pedestrian crossing over, it will be fine for the use for senior housing, which is the first item I would promote to see done, is that we would look at putting senior housing in, because that's what we need. I'm not going to say who should do it. I'm not up here to pick sides. I'm just going to tell you what I think use should be. Secondly, I would think it could be a senior center. I have a lot of experience with asbestos removal in the school district. We're in a district for 7 years. Pretty sure the building behind the big brick building is clean of asbestos. You'll find that out when you do your survey. So you tear down the building in front, you make it a parking lot, and we turn the other building into a senior center with nice green space in the back, and they can walk to different locations to do things. So that would be another good use of the property. I oppose selling it for $400,000. If you took economics, it's pretty simple. It's worth, we'll go to the low side, $700,000. Costs $300,000 to abate it and do all this stuff. You're going to lose $400,000. You could sell it yourself and make $400,000, right? Or you could make another $100,000 for the city instead of losing money. So I think you need to think of the economics of the whole process, that let's just keep it, tear it down if we need to, and market ourselves. I believe we have a real estate agent we contracted with, we had talked about that before, who ought to be able to help us with that, with those numbers. And I bet you might find a developer willing to do everything, tear it down, the whole 9 yards, for a much better price than $400,000. So that's my thought on it. As you know, I've spent some time up there with you all, so that'd be my recommendation, that we work in that area if you're going to send something to the board.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Chris Kilmurray. I'm the Executive Director of Lewiston Housing, and I live in Portland, Maine. I want to be first very clear. I have zero issues with Mr. Gendron. Does a lot of good for the city. This is not about us versus him. This is just more what I feel is the highest and best use of that property, so I want to put that out there. I'm also want to point out that as I've reached out to both the school system and Mr. Gendron and haven't heard anything back yet. I'd be open to a partnership on that site if we wanted to do a mixed-use development there. We cannot build commercial spaces through tax credit structures. It's impossible, but you can make condos and have different structures on the bottom. If somebody else can bring that resource to the deal and they're interested in doing that, we are very open to a partnership associated with that. I understand why council is probably frustrated that things didn't move forward. I said this last time, it's been a strange couple of years. Things have changed dramatically with COVID. Our deal fell apart due to constraints associated with COVID and supply chains and how tax credit laws worked. And now, with interest rates so high, we have less subsidy than we've ever had. So it's hard to develop housing right now. I would add, there's been a lot of talk about, let's put it out to bid and see what will happen. Let's see how much money we can get for this. You're not going to get housing for a higher cost that comes back to this. That constrains the cost associated with this. $125,000 was difficult to add into this structure, taking everything down, adding in all the fees associated with building it under the former tax credit laws. You're not going to sell this for $1 million and get senior housing. You're not going to sell it for $1 million and get market rate housing. The rents in Lewiston at this point in time do not support the debt that you need to build market rate housing, and you're not going to be able to add in a super high sale price into the structure of a tax credit deal. So I get that if you're going to sell it, and that's your right to do that for whatever price you want to, you're going to get something very different than housing on that site most likely. Unless somebody comes in with deep pockets and just wants to throw their money into that deal, they're not going to be able to make a financial stack or a structure that makes sense with a very high sale price. And my last point I want to make is I think we should stick with the option that we originally had on the table. Had there been a different lease structure in place with the share center, we would have bought that property in advance of the option even coming up, and we were just sitting on that property while we could have worked on it. The only reason we didn't purchase that property from the city in advance of the option was that we were not protected from paying out URA, Uniform Relocation Assistance, to the share center because of the lease structure that was there, which was not outlined in the original RFP to us as well. It was stated that there wasn't any encumbrances on the property. Turned out there was. It was nobody's fault. It was a mistake, but the reality is we would have bought it in advance of that had that not been the problem. So I would appreciate it if you could stick with it. Thank you.
Next.
My name is Richard Graham Mason. I live at 51 Jean Street. Numbers are important. Let's talk about the seniors. How many seniors are on a waiting list for senior housing? Okay, that's okay. I think those are important questions to ask. From the routes beyond East Avenue to Russell Street to Main Street, how many seniors live out there? How many seniors are getting to a point they can't maintain their home? How many of them will not or do not want to move downtown? I think that's important. So those are kinds of questions that you need to find out about. You know, those are not easy numbers sometimes, but the fact are, the seniors in this community have paid a lot. A lot of these seniors worked in the textile mills, and they worked at the shoe factories. They don't have pension plans. They have low Social Security. So, you know, I think you need to take care of the seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. Ronnie Parity, 82 Prospect. I'm 3 blocks down from Martel School. And I just want to say that my age group went to Martel School. There was never any accidents or anything like that, pedestrian back. And I haven't known of any in that corner. I think if, I'm recommending that you recommend to the city council to go back and let LHS come and bid, or any other people bid, and what they can do for that. I'm for senior housing. We need it in that area of the city and everything else. I know from that, and I know that some construction can be, I used to walk those streets, and I still do,
because I live up there. And all we have now is that empty Promenade Mile by Gendron with nothing in it but a dollar store. Okay, we got Paycheck, I know that. And I just seen too many buildings lay bare by some developers, and I'm not going to mention, I'm going to be Christian and not mention any developers, but my land around Lisbon Street is owned by Gendron, and they have done nothing with Tim Hortons, okay? Rite Aid is finally going to have something, and that garage right there in the entrance of that thing, so we don't have any stores there anymore. We don't have Sears, we don't have Bradley's, or anything. We need, and we used to have at the school crossing guards, so there was never any accidents in the school back then.
Yeah.
And we used to go ice skate in there and everything, and there was never any accidents there. So I think, I think the road can be developed where you can do it, but I want it for seniors, and we need a senior center too.
Ronnie, before you leave the mic, for the record, you said LHS, I think you misspoke, but because there's an inquiry from the school department, I want the record to reflect you intended LHA.
Yes,
Okay.
I did. I just want to mention about the school too. The school can have land at Connors School for administration office. There's no reason that Dingley building has plenty of space if they want to do it too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Here I am again, Diane Grand Mason, 51 Jean Street. Today I'm here to ask you to give the option to Lewiston Housing. I represent a lot of seniors in the background. They're not at this meeting because they don't like to go out after dark, but I'm here for them. And so anyways, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and I'm turning 80 years old. And I want to wish you all a happy Valentine's Day. But I want you to have a heart, and I want you to have senior housing. There's too many seniors that are looking forward. You've dangled this in front of them for 2 years now, and now you don't want to give the option. This is not fair. We've given up the multi-purpose that used to be a place that we could go. We had a cafeteria there, and then we had Meals on Wheels go there, where people could go there and be with other people their age. And you took that all away from us. We gave it, and now it's Longley School. So what are you going to give us? What are you giving us back? We've paid taxes all our lives, and you're not giving us a fair chance. Seniors deserve it. They volunteer the most in the city, and we paid the most taxes, and you owe it to us. So have a nice Valentine's Day, and remember, have a heart. When you go by Martel School, and it's not a senior housing, you'll feel guilty.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to make any comments?
My name is Skip Estes. I live at 62 Spring Street in Auburn. I've lived in this area my whole life, and I've owned at least a dozen houses, and I'm at a point now where I need senior housing that's affordable. I lost my home because I couldn't afford to pay the taxes on it. And make a long story short, a local realtor swindled me out of it, and it was a $400,000 house. And I have nothing now, so I have to turn to senior housing. Hopefully something I can afford. That's why I'm here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Louise Sampson, 324 Pine Street. If you read Saturday's paper, I'm the one that wrote the letter to the editor. I've been following this since a year ago, January, when there was an ad that came out in the Sun Journal regarding the redevelopment of Martel School So I've been following it that long. I've made many calls to Lewiston Housing as well as Avesta Housing. And I have to say, your Lewiston Housing people aren't always the best on the phone. Amen. Rude. Anyway. I could never get an answer, yes or no, on as to when it was going to happen. Obviously, the way it looks, it's not going to happen. I finally got correspondence from a lady from Avesta before the holidays where she stated to give her a call after the holidays. And I was just about to call when these newspaper ads came out regarding back to square one, so on and so forth. I have to agree with all these other people, the Grand Masons, Mr. Gallant. We need elderly housing. Any of you been to Meadowview? It's old and decrepit. I wouldn't live there if you let me live there for free. And yes, I wouldn't live downtown for all the money in China. I drive a van for the Hudson bus lines. I drive special needs kids. So I'm in the inner city every day. The inner city, Ash Street, Pine Street, used to be beautiful streets. Now they're nothing but dumps. Garbage everywhere. I don't want to live where there's garbage everywhere. I'm 77 years old. I want a nice place to live. I live in a nice place now, but I'm working. I can afford it. I don't want to work anymore. I need a hip replacement. I want to stay home and enjoy what I have left of my retirement years. I want a brand new apartment to live in. I know there's a lot that goes on regarding getting all these tax credits and all that, which I don't understand. But it must be the same for housing for all of these inner city buildings that are going up, and the new ones that are going to be going up called the Choice Neighborhood. You're all going to be seniors one day. Mr. Dupre is. Maybe that lady Amy is too. I don't know. Lucy is. Okay? Lucy, you have your own home. I'm sure, Roger, you do too. But those of us that don't, if all you have is Social Security, we need help, and especially in these days, in these times. So please, don't forget us.
Okay.
Continue with this program. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything? Okay, in that case, I will close it to the public, and I will bring it back to the board. Discussion? Shanna?
Yeah. I believe that there is one item that we are already on consensus of, so I want to build from that, which is, I believe in our conversation tonight and earlier that this planning board is in agreement that we would be making a recommendation to dispose of the property, which would include LHA. Ma'am, please. For LHA to purchase the property, we need to make a positive recommendation to dispose of the property to City Council. Otherwise, we're holding on to it and nobody lives there.
I got you. Sorry, didn't understand.
It's okay, but if you could just hear us out. If I'm correct that we're of agreement there, it feels like in the motion that's provided, the discussion point stems from that in terms of what recommendations we would hope City Council would listen to about how we would hope that they would use it if we choose to recommend that it's disposed. I just want to do a straw poll. Is that correct? Is there anyone on the planning board who's feeling like the city should not dispose of the property and should hold it?
I don't think we should dispose of it under the terms that are proposed.
I don't think we get terms, and that's, I guess, a point for city staff to clarify, but in terms of the, and for the audience tonight, in terms of the purview of this board, we can make a recommendation to dispose of the property to City Council, and we can make notes on how we would hope they would dispose of it, what we would like for them to do with that property. Ultimately, that's City Council's choice. And because this is a simple disposition, we don't get to put any contracts or occupancy. There's not, this is not a development review. This isn't a contract rezone, right? So just making sure that everybody here is clear on what our purview is. There was a lot of like what we've done. I don't believe this planning board has done most of the things. We'll put it on the record and put it towards city government at large, but just for clarity.
We are only here to make a recommendation to the city council. Yes, we dispose of it. No, we don't dispose of it. They will have the ultimate decision, and they don't have to follow our recommendation. So we are just a recommending body. So I just want to make that clear. If you, for whatever, whatever our recommendation is tonight, you need to go to the city council meeting.
Tuesday next week.
And that's.
That's tentative.
Tentative?
Yes.
Keep checking your newspaper.
Yeah, keep checking the newspaper and to see when it will be. Because they are the ultimate deciders. We are not. So we will make a recommendation, but the city council makes the ultimate decision. Okay? So Shanna.
Can I make a recommendation to start our discussion about how we might move forward?
Absolutely.
Before you make a motion.
Do you
I'm
wanna
not.
make a
I'm making a
motion?
recommendation for us to discuss that would go with a motion once it's made, if we choose to do
I
that.
have a unique motion that I've been developing as the discussion has gone on. It's actually worded in the affirmative. Now, it's going to be interesting. I do have some comments to make ahead of that, though, too.
So may I also, I was
Okay.
not making a motion.
Okay.
So make your comments, and then Michael, and we'll keep making comments before we go on for any motions.
I believe, and evidence bears out, that when cities make investments in housing, particularly subsidized housing, and in this instance where there is an agreement and a need for senior housing, that it spurs additional housing, and it can create both walkable neighborhoods, additional retail that you've heard requested here tonight and that you've heard hearkened back to, and the moment of time that we have, Chris was absolutely right. We're not going to get the type of housing that we'd like to see, subsidized or not, seniors or not. We're not going to get to see that type of housing in the near term. And I say that as a planning board member who's reviewed how many extensions for people might put a stake in the property and say, we want to develop this and we want it to be housing. We don't see that development come through without the aid of complex financing packages and tax credits. And if we anchored that corner with senior housing, it would spur additional housing. It would tell people, hopefully city council, public works, this planning board, that there is investments being made into that intersection that would create smaller scale commerce and pedestrian use and additional retail. And when we think with our planning board hat on about what that intersection and the 4 acres on either side of the center of that could look like, a la legacy comp plan, the opportunity is significant. And by both this board and city council making a recommendation to pursue an agreement with LHA for senior housing, we're both saying that we want that type of development and that we are prioritizing housing in our community while actually taking action to move us in that direction. And so I'm in favor of disposing of the property. I'm in favor of making a recommendation very similar to what I just laid out here about what we would hope would be planned use and development of that property while recognizing that the council will do as it wishes.
Michael?
I have one question first. The question was asked earlier, didn't really get answered. So if I could engage Mr. Kilmurray. How many seniors are on the waiting list?
Currently, for Section 8 housing in Lewiston, there are 85, and for public housing, which is similar income guidelines, there's over 1,600. We update our wait list every 6 months with fresh names that have come back to us and said we are interested in housing. So roughly 1,700 people in Lewiston are looking for senior over 62 affordable housing.
So 1,700 over 62. I'm just saying it into the mic for the record.
Yes.
Oh, that number was also over 62, the 1,600?
Right, it's 62 and probably disabled?
62, over 62.
Just over 62?
Filtered for over 62.
Okay.
We did put a disability.
Okay, all right, just to clarify.
Okay. Which is an interesting comment, because I was thinking about it as you answered the question. Is this project going to be for mobility?
Accessibility.
Yeah, for seniors with mobility issues, if I remember right.
There's always going to be some level of, you have to have some level of ADA, it's usually 10%.
Okay, because I remember that was how the whole project was billed back in 2019. Okay, so make a comment, then I'd like to make a motion, if that's
Make a
okay.
comment, go ahead.
I think it would be shameful for the city council not to do anything else other than to support our comp plan. Our comp plan addresses the serious need for senior housing, as we've heard in many different various testimonies tonight. My council, myself included, rejected one particular project just down the road from that location. When this particular project came up, when the RFPs went out, and there was one responsive bidder, LHA or Avesta or the partnership, they were responsive to the bid. And not to extend them an option, after we extend options all over the place, that would be unconscionable at this time. And having said that...
Okay, any other comments from any, Christine?
I'd just like to comment, since I haven't yet, that I agree with the opinions of others on the board that have been spoken so far, and I just, for the public's sake, this was a project that this board was very excited to support when it originally came to us, so I think, I can't speak for everyone else here, but I think most of us were quite disappointed that things have turned out this way, and would very much all love to see this project go forward, since we all were supportive of it in the first place. I live in this general neighborhood. I live down the street on Weber Ave, and so I frequent that corner quite often, and I am not considered a senior now, but I do plan on staying in Lewiston until I am. So would personally be very supportive of there being senior housing at that location. I think it's the best use of the property.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments at this time? Roger?
I agree with what's going on. The only thing is what I'd like to say is that, you know, whatever motion that we make, is that we include the fact that we recommend to the city council to revisit the LHA proposal.
Okay. Michael?
So if I don't stumble here, I'm going to try to word this in the favorable direction. I had actually contemplated unfavorable earlier until I thought I came up with something here, and let's see if it works. So I make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4H of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to renew the purchase option with the Lewiston Housing Authority to allow LHA to continue development of affordable senior housing at the former Martel school site to the City Council for the disposition of 860 Lisbon Street.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Roger, any further discussion? In that case, Roger Dupree?
Yes.
Joshua Najin?
Yes.
Michael Marcotte?
Yes.
Shanna Cox?
Yes.
Christine Kittredge?
Yes.
Amy Smith?
Yes.
And Lucy Bisson, yes. In that, framed that way, I agree. I really am very disappointed with the city council that they did not renew this, this option for them. And even though possibly Mr. Gendron will have a mixed use with apartments and retail, just look at the building at Shaw's. The stores that they added to Shaw's have never been fully, fully rented. So why in the world would we put more retail on that corner? Because it's never been fully rented. So that's my 2 cents. And okay, so we're all done with this. Thank you very much for coming. And if you want to make your, your people, so the city council knows what you feel, you need to go to the city council meeting and David,
Yeah, just to clarify, as of this morning, there was discussion about whether or not this was going to be on next Tuesday's meeting, so I would suggest checking with the clerk's office by Thursday or Friday to confirm if it's going to be next Tuesday or not.
okay? Yes, and I'm going to call a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay. Yeah,
While we're on recess, I'd just love to say that if there's a way that we could talk favorably about what we want in this town without disparaging other parts of this town, it makes for good citizenry. I don't care, they're screaming into the abyss right now. What was that? That's where I live. That's where she lives. 324 Pine? Just checking. Sorry, I'm done.
Just
Yeah, my vote.
note too, absolutely valid, because I see it in my community constantly where folks that don't have an option to move into housing, they occupy that building until it deteriorates.
Yeah.
And they're alone.
Yeah.
So other people moving into the community, because it's just not a market, so.
It was nice to see you, Louise.
I basically said that it was a large factor in why I moved to Lewiston.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. I used to live in Northern Virginia, and
Halfway to Poland.
something called the Washington Old Dominion Railroad, right
Yeah.
away, all the way out to Shannon.
I thought about it, but I didn't
I
trust
think I might
myself.
have biked it the last time I was down.
Oh, really?
in DC,
Oh,
yes.
my son was down there. He was good.
I know when I am untrusted.
Now it's always spider
Good, thanks, Shelley.
I think I went well.
The thing is that, you know, I asked Lincoln last week at the last meeting, you know, what was the reason why? Trail from.
That just.
They said, you know, we just didn't want to say it, right? That's
I
why-
went to a meeting. I used to live in Portland, so that one's been on the table for a while.
Well, that's what they were saying, that there's got to be something going on there as to the reason why. Yes, in my backyard.
Exactly.
I'd like to see more.
Thank you. I mean,
One of the things too, which just came to mind,
it does
me was
quite a
that
bit for development. So if you look at the Eastern Trail down in Scarborough, they actually developed some farmland that was right now.
Okay, so we're back in session.
No.
All right, the next item for other business is a planning board recommendation to the city council on the disposition of 65 Oxford Street rear, a portion of the Continental Mill. Shelley?
Okay. So this site is adjacent to, well, it includes a portion of the Continental Mill building. So if you look up on the screen, you can see the teal-colored L-shaped parcel, if you will, that it includes part of the building. It fronts the river and fronts the canal. So the Continental Mill is currently owned by Chinburg Properties, and this disposition would be to sell that property to Chinburg Properties. I've listed here kind of some basic information about the property. It's just under an acre at 0.88 acres in size. It's zoned riverfront. There's some shoreland zone along the river. You can see there's 2 dashed gray lines that go through it between the building and the river, and that's where the sewer line is. I can come turn the sewer line on for you, but essentially...
No, that's fine.
Oh, okay. Lincoln has more information, so that's probably all you need to hear from me, and we'll let Lincoln tell you more detail.
Okay. All right. Mr. Jeffers, please.
Yeah, this has been contemplated and talked about. I think most people are aware of it. When Chinburg was first buying the Continental Mill, I expressed to them the city's desire to extend the trail along the river. And they thought, God, great idea, it'd be great amenity for the thing. Yeah, we'd be willing to give you an easement. And as they got into ownership of the mill, there's that one corner that's shown there, which is an old generating asset that has not spun in quite some time. And it's not in great shape, but they just want to sort of consolidate their ownership there, and the shape of the parcel has been used. You can see there's some parking and access to, I don't think that's a loading dock. That's a bump out in the main mill, but it's an access doorway. So it just makes sense. Jeff Boley from the city's purchasing, or not purchasing, city's Public Works Department has been back and forth with Chinburg trying to line up where the easement should be, and that really was agreed that it would be right along the top of the riverbank, would be the most attractive to use, and would minimize the impacts upon their ability to park and do what they need to for redevelopment of the Continental Mill. And the one thing that Shelley said, that we are not selling it to Chinburg. This is really a swap of we would be conveying that L-shaped parcel in exchange for the easement. One of the issues, though, is the only reason we own that is because of the canal acquisition. And in the deeds going back into the 60s, it states if you stop using that for generation, it goes back to the owner of the Continental Mill. So this is really just taking in, putting in place what's already there. It's having the council take the formal actions to do it. And that's what we're asking for a recommendation on.
Okay. All right. Michael?
Maybe it's redundant, but, so we acquired it back in the 60s?
No. We acquired, this was part of the city's canal acquisition, which again, we didn't pay anything for it. It was simply Brookfield said, we're going to take this out of our FERC license. They're better in your hands than our hands. Please take them. And the city agreed to it. But that portion of the Continental Mill, I think it was back in the 60s. It was Union Water Power, and there were a bunch of old school names.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we would own a piece of the building.
We had the right to be in it.
We had the right to be
in it, and that L-shaped parcel was part of...
that portion of the building we were in.
Party?
Right, but we had the rights to be in it. They couldn't kick us out, but...
I thought it was still operating as part of the Continental Mill.
No.
Okay.
No, originally it probably was, and then it was bought by Union Power, then Florida Power and Light, then it just kept going down the daisy chain, but it was...
Yes. Ms. Cox?
Sorry, were you all set?
Nope.
I'd like to make a motion unless there's further discussion by my...
No.
One
Alec?
quick question. Sorry.
No, you can't ask any more questions. Go ahead.
Joking now, but
I am.
Just out of curiosity, are there still any power resources on the property? Is there still interconnection with CMP there? I know it hasn't been used for generating, but is that interconnection still maintained at that site?
And functional?
It's probably, yeah, that's a good question. I honestly don't know whether it's actually been cut off. I know we have not spun it, nor do we have the water rights to spin the turbines. So you would think they would have disconnected it, but I'm not positive.
Do you know how many megawatts or less kilowatts that the generating capacity is of the station?
I didn't look it up. It's relatively minor. It might be, 350, 400, 500 kilowatts type
Okay.
thing. It was not a major power generator.
Gotcha.
The city has never spun it during our ownership, and to my knowledge, it hasn't spun in 10, 20 years.
I wouldn't recommend trying to turn that thing on.
No. I mean, it's very cool to look at the old infrastructure, but it's what, that was part of our deal when we were acquiring the canals. We said, look, we need the water for aesthetic purposes, not for
Yeah,
generating
right.
power.
Okay, Ms. Cox.
I'd like to make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4H of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for the disposition of 65 Oxford Street rear in exchange for the easements as described.
I would second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roger Dupree?
Yes.
Joshua Najin?
Yes.
Michael Marcotte?
Yes.
Shanna Cox?
Yes.
Christine Kittredge?
Yes.
And Amy Smith?
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. All right. Next, discussion about downtown TIF with economic development staff. I think, Mr. Jeffers, you're up.
I'm up. My memo sort of covered, I had two memos. One was here's how TIFs work, and here's the various TIFs that we have in place. TIF is sort of the way you guys feel about planning and nuances of the zoning code. Is there anybody who has a question about how TIFs work, especially without an audience here? I'm happy to address it, but I don't need to take the time.
Okay. Not that I really need an explanation on how TIFs work. I was surprised it was on the agenda tonight. I would have brought a couple books that I specifically bought a couple months back when I knew this was going to come to us in the future. Rarely read a book from cover to cover, but this one kind of enthused me, and when I got through it, it seemed quite different than the way we do TIFs here. I don't know if this is because the state of Maine has certain methodologies, and the TIFs that this book was referring to was sort of going back through the history in the Midwest and so forth, and it was, so my understanding from reading that text is TIF increment financing is done by significant sized geographies, which I think is what was brought up here at the planning board late last year, was an indicator that we would like to see the riverfront be a TIF zone. But looking at the list that was provided and how I remember seeing it in the past with the city of Lewiston, TIFs were granted to specific parcels, specific projects, like what we see here, the Hampton Inn, the substation, so on and so forth. Is there a distinction between one or the other? Is there a limitation in the state of Maine as to how they can be designed?
The statute does vary from state to state. I'm not familiar with it in other states, so if you read sort of a national text, I wouldn't be surprised if there were nuances. Maine statute allows two types of TIFs. One is for infrastructure, which is the first type that the state had, and that's where we want to support a project, the city will borrow funding for road, water, sewer, whatever, and we get paid back by the tax increment from the project as we negotiate. It was great, but it puts municipalities at risk. If you make that investment in the public infrastructure and the project doesn't get back, you're still holding the bag. Taxpayers need to pay for it. So the state created a second type of TIF, what's called a credit enhancement TIF, which is what we typically see more here. We occasionally will do an infrastructure TIF, or we'll sometimes combine them. But an infrastructure TIF does not go back to the developer. They're getting the benefit of improved public infrastructure in that neighborhood, but we're paying for that debt with the project, and often we've needed to use a portion of the taxes paid to help make the project financially viable. And that's how, it's always a council decision. And my opening statement with each developer I talk to is like, look, this is not a foregone conclusion that you get a TIF. You got to prove you need it. Do you have, do you have slopes? Do you have wetlands? Do you have extraordinary site development costs that justify the city using some of the taxpayers' dollars to help make this project go? So that's the nuances of TIFs in Maine. As far as the doing just a big broad brushstroke, let's have a big district, you are limited, I think it's 5% of your total acreage in the community can be put into a TIF district. And we've always been, so that's part of the reason we've always done it project by project. And it's also, if you have that big broad brushstroke, we only have one TIF, which is out in the Gendron Business Park, South Lewiston area. There's a lot of acreage out there. We were trying to spark retail out there. Walmart was very interested in going. You're smiling. Were you on the council at that point?
I think it predated me on the council.
Even predated. I mean, we've had a couple of bites at that apple, actually. But to do it, the chunk of ground that is looked at, as you come off the turnpike, there's a big rock wall right in front of you. Yeah. It's on top of that, so you got to get up on there. There is a petroleum pipeline that bisects it diagonally, and there's an enormous amount of ledge that would need to be blasted. So, and there's no water and sewer there. So as we had looked at it, we said, okay, let's create a bigger district. This retail will spark other things. And so when you have this omnibus TIF, which is this large TIF district, which if we did a downtown TIF, it would be in that same category. So you get the district itself approved. That's a council action. 10 days public notice. You have to go through that exercise. After that, you can do individual projects. But, and I know one of the things coming back from the planning board is let's just have sort of a cookie cutter. Okay, you get 20% or you get whatever deal we throw on there. From my seat, I don't want to just make it a given. I think it needs to be justified. The most recent downtown TIF we've done is this 145 Lisbon Street, the old professional building, which is going to become 15 market rate apartments. You've got an elevator that needs to be revamped there, and there are other extraordinary, because it's considered a high rise, there were certain elements that were more expensive and needed to be done. So we did a TIF to allow the developer to make those improvements and still make a reasonable margin on his project. The one question I guess would be, we're down to less than 1% of beyond that capacity. We've got a handful of TIFs retiring over the next couple of years, which will open up. We'll have a little more capacity. But the other reason we have, because we even talked about doing a broad brushstroke TIF, let's just TIF the downtown, and we've got it in place. When you first establish a TIF, you set, here's the original assessed value of all the real estate within that TIF district. Anytime you demolish something within that TIF district, you got to make that difference up before you're making money with the TIF, if that makes sense. If you, let's say it's $10 million, you knock $1 million down, you need to create $2 million of value to just get $1 million left. If you do it just on a project by project basis and you establish the TIF after the demolition happens, you've got more increment to work with, which is the reason we've done that. The Sun Journal was the first time we had done that. There were some apartments over there. There was actually, I think, there were 2 on Middle Street. Middle Street got discontinued, but we kind of got a lower original assessed value, which when you add new value, there's more increment to work with. The Hampton Inn was similarly structured. There was the old R.I. Mitchell building was down there. And that needed to come down, and the timing on the TIF was such where we didn't have that. The original assessed value did not include that brick building. We timed it so it happened afterwards. With that as background as to why we have not just done big, broad districts to date, I think we're largely through the demolition that we're going to do. There's going to be some demolition, probably, going forward, but less in the commercial area of the downtown, probably more up in the tree streets and whatnot. So I will offer that as something that softens my stance on that, but that is why we've historically not done it.
Okay. Ms. Cox?
I'm trying to find a late in the evening polite way of saying this, and it's not meant to be impolite, but bear with me. I'm excited about this topic. Is it an invitation for a discussion about what we want to incentivize with TIFs and where TIFs might be, or was this just an information? I'd love to have this conversation, and I am just gonna jump start in, and you can pull me back as much as you'd like. But I think I'm hearing some discussion about the opportunity to think about an omnibus district where it's not a given, where there might be some restraints, but relative to the downtown, that would spur additional development. I would also like to put on the table for discussion, because this board has talked about it so many times, if we could identify an area within Lewiston where we were looking at single-family and townhome development, where a TIF district might be identified so that we can be thoughtful about where infrastructure needs to be extended, and that we're identifying the area we'd like to see that happen based on school capacity and existing water and sewer and pavement. I'd love to see both a housing TIF district that is not just the market rate ones that we've seen in here, but something that opens up additional inventory for people who are stuck in apartments right now who would love to buy, to get, which would create some additional movement in our multifamily inventory as well. And obviously, I love business and would love to incentivize business, but I'd love to have a discussion about those two things, and not just, I'd love for that discussion to be focused on what the TIF district would incentivize and where, and not just as well the criteria of why somebody would be able to access the TIF. I think it's a both and. And I don't know where you wanted this conversation to go tonight. There wasn't a lot of framework, and so I'm throwing a couple things in because I'm excited.
There was not a lot of framework, so I just said, let me start with an education, and then we can pick up the conversation. To that point, TIFs are not just, you can TIF anything.
No.
Single-family homes, can't TIF them. There is or if you TIF them, there needs to be it needs to be under the Maine Housing Authority's TIF district, which caps it at 120% of area median income. That would allow you to help.
Great.
Which is not bad, but we have not historically done those. The housing TIFs we've done have been with Lewiston Housing Authority, Avestas, and those are the entities who've done it. It's generally been a big multifamily project.
Community needs starter homes and not McMansions.
I'm sorry?
This community needs starter homes and not McMansions.
No, agreed. It's finding that piece of real estate, and I think the council, again, would be amenable to it, but recognizing we've got a fair amount of affordable housing here and here tonight. People say we need more. We also need middle income and upper end. We do not have any. That's part of the reason, I shouldn't say we don't have any, we don't have enough. We have a lack of supply in all aspects.
Totally
so
agree.
There's real estate coming up that's going to be put on the market, 55 Old Lisbon Road, 65 acres out off of Old Lisbon Road.
Yeah.
And that will be housing. Do we want to say, in my mind, that's a good middle income and starting to creep in, depending on how it's done, could be a nice upper middle income. Do we really want to see a large 65 or 50 unit senior project put out there? I don't think it's an appropriate spot for it. I think the single family home, the townhomes, makes sense. But it's also, as Chris Kilmurray said, how do you make the numbers work?
Yeah.
Isn't that the point of the
cost
TIF?
of construction is such that the rents you need to charge, and if we put a cap on how much they can charge, because we help pay for the roads, water, sewer, being extended to it, it's a conversation to be had, but we're not necessarily able to use it. We can't use an economic development TIF for that. You can when it's a multifamily, because that's considered a commercial use. If it's an apartment complex, we could probably do it. If it's a single-family home or condos, I would have to dig into it. We haven't done it. I know there's a mechanism, but exactly, if you can do a TIF with the developer of a townhome project, who gets the benefit? The person who ultimately buys it? That would get wildly complicated, so that's what I'm...
Right. Josh, you had something, and then Amy and Alex.
Okay, I just want to bring up a few things real quick. First and foremost, single family housing, great. duplexes are better. So, as we're all trying to figure out how to block LD 2003, having conversations about costs on building a single-family home, and then where an elder does go, or a family member, for instance, when they've basically termed out of their home. Something to think about. But when I had put this forward, my thought about this was specifically the buildings that the owners are cash poor and don't have the capacity to develop them in the ways that need to happen for the downtown area, which again, it comes back to this whole thing where nobody's really sure what the downtown business district is, right? Like we've never actually defined it. It's not 2 blocks of Lisbon Street. It's not. But at the same time, there's a lot of structures where you've got folks that own buildings that they bought for $400,000. They might have $1.5 million in order to invest in it, but that building needs $2.5 million of investment to engage the entire space. And so it's a thought about how we push forward the types of development we want to see in places where we want to see it, especially for mixed use. And when you look at all of the downtown, the Riverfront Island Master Plan area, we've taken out a lot of that, of the structures that were there at that point. So again, how do we get mixed use in that space, in those spaces, without figuring out ways to incentivize the building of it? And so that, I'm not necessarily saying that like we need a TIF zone. What I'm saying is that we need a clear way for a developer to come to the city to say, I want a TIF for this project, and I know it qualifies, because it's what we're looking for as far as development's concerned.
And I couldn't hear that last part you said.
Because it's what we're looking for as far as what development's concerned. So basically, we've outlined the key portions of what we're interested in seeing happen to areas of the city that, and that comes back to the whole, like, we have this community business zone, and then we have a highway business zone, right? We still don't have a zoning that permits multifamily units or dense housing that doesn't permit all of the other retail uses. And so, like, that's another part that, I think that would be a part where we would look at possibly TIF focuses as well,
Yep, Amy?
Yeah, Lincoln, just to clarify, so TIFs are only for buildings that are going to be rentals?
No, the Maine State Housing Authority has a TIF program, which is for affordable housing. Typically, it's used to help leverage low-income housing tax credit projects. But in the statute, it allows you to go up to 120% of area median income if you had somebody who wanted to build a subdivision, and they needed help putting in the roads, water, sewer, that type of thing. So there is a mechanism. I'm sorry,
But you said something about if it's not a rental unit and a developer develops it and then they sell it, who gets the benefit of the TIF?
Well, yeah, no, and that's what I would have to look at under the Maine Housing Program. I've never known of anybody who has actually done the 120%. Let's help you build out a subdivision. In that case, it would be the developer, because they would have been the person incurring the cost.
Right.
But if you simply built and said they're going to be expensive units to develop, and the TIF is not going to flow down to the ultimate buyer, perhaps if we created a TIF and said, okay, it costs you $300,000 to build it, we only want you to sell them for $200,000 or $250,000, the TIF could cover the difference. I'm not sure it can be structured that way, but I think that's where you're kind of heading. Am I correct? Or?
Alex had a question.
Just wanted to make sure I understand this. So basically, we're using the incremental increase in tax revenue. We're like basically not charging tax on a property for a certain period of time to help make the finances work better, or?
Yeah, in a nutshell, yeah, you take a portion of the new taxes generated to help make a project viable. And usually it's not 100%. It's what's it going to take to make it work. Mm-hmm. And so it's a negotiated number based on each project.
So, this building will cost $300,000 to build. So, but, there's no way we can make it economically viable at that. We can make it economically viable at, 250, and so over the next 5 years, we're going to give you 10 grand a year, basically, or am I? not-
Well, that is what I said, but let
Okay.
me put in the caveat, that's me conjecturing on how it could work. I've never looked at the statute to see if you could actually do it that way.
Gotcha. But we've done it.
We've done it with commercial.
Commercial, but not
We have a lot of
residential.
commercial, and those typically are not condo, those you're redeveloping a building and you've got a tenant.
Gotcha.
Or
I
you've
was
got a
using.
big, you've got a big multifamily, and again, you're the owner of a
Yeah.
commercial enterprise that happens to be renting housing.
I wasn't implying housing by the numbers I chose.
Okay.
I was just using
Yeah.
random numbers there. But good to know that we've only done it for commercial and that that's how it could theoretically work. Is that how it theoretically works across the board, just to make sure that my understanding is correct?
The sentence is, you take a portion of the new taxes generated, put it back into the project to make it viable. That's really a TIF in a nutshell.
Okay.
We have done it for affordable housing.
So you're like collecting the taxes and then cutting them a check? That's the
Yeah,
mechanism?
exactly. They send,
Okay.
yeah, it's literally take it out of this pocket,
Cool.
give it back to them. But we've done it on probably 6 or 7 affordable housing projects,
They're outlined in the
Hartley
memo.
Block, the Loss of Bates Mill.
Yeah, you've got a
Almost
whole
any
bunch in
New
here.
housing project that's been built has done an affordable housing TIF, which is under Maine Housing's program. And then the State Department of Economic and Community Development who runs the commercial side. And the rules are similar, not identical, but similar. Very
Okay.
similar.
All right. Shannon?
Thank you. I guess, in terms of the way this agenda item came to be on tonight's agenda, I'm just wondering if by some of the questions that we're asking you and what Mr. Najin said, I wonder if the question is a broader question about what tools we can use, of where TIF is one, what tools we can use to identify what we want to incentivize for development in this city, and when and where a TIF might be an appropriate tool, or other tools. I just, it's the whole like everything's a nail because we've got a hammer thing, and I don't think that was the intent. And which was part of what my clarifying questions were too. You know, the note around infrastructure versus credit enhancement for the two types of TIFs. I mean, I think your example was a really good one. We've seen Old Webster Road kind of coming down the pike, and we've made actionable choices to ensure that it could get to market because there's a lot of potential there. And so when you think, and I am not somebody to ask our taxpayers to subsidize the cost of sprawl, so I want to just kind of put a fine point on that. But how can we be specific about what we would like to see investment come into this city? Knowing that we can't preclude certain investments, but how can we be proactive, and what tools are there where it might be an invitation to have a conversation about a TIF, or what items this city is prioritizing for potential TIFs so that developers can hear that and take note and start those conversations, whether it be a district or whether it be there's an openness to confined infrastructure investments that expand the residential footprint in our previously uninhabited lands, and we'll only do it in these 60 acres. This is where the infrastructure should get your buddies and plan developments together. But how can we proactively say, the city of Lewiston is looking for missing middle residential housing. The city of Lewiston is looking to support growing and incubator spaces in our downtown and would have these conversations. Or the city of Lewiston understands that accessibility is an issue and would be willing to have a conversation about the installation of elevators to support the addition of residential housing on upper floors. Like, how can we support you in doing your job, and how might, whether it's a TIF or otherwise, how might we have a conversation about what we'd like to see incentivized and where? And then I'm sure a future conversation about what the potential tools are that could achieve those things.
Sure, Josh.
Sorry, Rod.
No, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh.
I was just going to say, like, a good example would be Jules's TIF that he received in order to actually fix infrastructure that needed to be fixed in order to have the public be able to use that space, right? Like, that's something that, like, had we put that on the city to be like, hey, put it in the LCIP, we'd be cutting it this year. And that would never get developed is space to be able to use. So like, that's just one example, right? Like, these are the types of things that like, I think as a planning board, we want to promote a way for developers to approach economic development and planning and code in order to have these conversations about the places that we see potential for or absolute need as well, because when you look at specifically Lisbon Street, there are a couple of buildings a few buildings that if they don't change hands or receive investment, you know, they might not be standing in 20 years. You know? And so just...
Yeah. Roger?
Lincoln, is there a formula that you use for determining the amount of TIF and the length of time that this TIF goes into effect? And is there a situation where a TIF had gotten an extension beyond its due date?
It has happened occasionally. Two that come to mind are Walmart, where they just couldn't get in the ground quick enough. There was a state statute that sort of paused them on their redevelopment, so that was negotiated in a black bag. You didn't know. We ultimately figured out who we were dealing with, but it was just project quality and who are these guys and do we want them. But that one just didn't get done. Another one, Saxon, was just extended about the same time you folks gave them another couple of years on their building permit or site approval. The TIF was also extended for a 2-year time frame, and I suspect the council will not be willing to do that at all this time, next time. I mean, Saxon sort of had the project out there. COVID happened, a lot of things happened, but it was a challenging project out of the gate, and if they don't get it together, really need to be starting getting in the ground next year. And if they don't, that TIF will not, I suspect, will not be extended.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, anybody else have any comments, questions? Michael?
Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
You mentioned Sun Journal. That one's expired?
That one has expired, yes.
And so that's why it's not on the list. And thinking about the old racetrack, that must have expired some time ago.
Yeah, that was one. Yeah, there were 9. Again, racetrack I didn't do. The first TIF I ever wrote was the Sun Journal one.
Sun Journal one?
So, and that did retire.
And the oldest one here looks like 2002. I was looking at the expiration dates. So Walmart, would be coming off in 2024, Central Maine Power this year, Franklin Property Trust in 2024. It seems like some of these TIFs are going out longer, the ones that come after that. I'm seeing 2045 in one case.
Typically, I think our longest TIF may be the one for the Picker House lot. No, that's 20 years as well. Okay. Yeah, 20 years is about as long. You can go as long as 30. Historically, Lewiston is not.
30 is the high.
Typical TIF is around 20 years. Sometimes it's 15. Sometimes it's 10 or 12.
Yeah.
Like this Hampton Inn. It was all about their costs were more. That we'll have all this cost, but we won't have the revenues in the early years. So the TIF was heavy in the early years and then diminished over time. And it will be expiring, I think, in a year or two.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. This is very interesting, and I think, it makes it makes it easier for us to understand when a project comes back with, they needed a TIF, and, so at least now we know what the machinations of that are. And I think that's been very helpful for me, and I've been on the planning board for a while, so.
Well, good, and I guess to Josh's point, and Shanna's as well, as far as marketing, let me say, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a potential developer where TIF has not come up.
Right,
And
yeah,
it's
they
not-
know.
It's not always yes. It's
Right.
And what I said to you, look, justify it.
Right.
What are your extraordinary site costs? If this is just a run-of-the-mill project on a piece of flat ground that's got water, sewer stubbed to the street, our job is not to make you wealthier. Our job is to make projects happen that don't happen. Where we're probably falling short, admittedly, is that marketing. Just saying, hey, Lewiston really wants to see development, and they're willing to entertain TIFs within this district, but I would not want to have we'll give you 20% or 30, because it really depends on the project. And
Right.
also, really depends on the scale of the project as well. Before you've got any money that's really has enough to make a difference, you need about a $2 million level of new valuation coming out of it.
Amy had her hand up first.
No, I just wanted to support what Shannon was saying about how do we get the conversation going about other tools in our toolkit? Just what's the process for that?
I don't think there is,
I think
apparently there is no process for
I
that.
think the question is, the members of the planning board would like to know how best to engage with each other and with staff about the fundamental conversation about what we'd like to see incentivized. And is that correct, Amy? And to the marketing point, I think it's not, we're happy to have a conversation about a TIF that we want marketed. It's this conversation about Lewiston is looking to engage small residential retail and restaurants downtown, and looking to engage additional middle income and above single-family residential and multifamilies, like whatever the thing is that can be discussed here and at city council. And I can't imagine that staff's not having these conversations and would love this space to bring forward those ideas too. I think the question is, what is it that we would market, that we're interested in a potential, because I'm sure every conversation includes a conversation for a TIF. I think it's the ability to say, no, we're not talking about TIFs for a fast food restaurant. We're not talking about TIFs for, and to be clear, and for those of us who are also supporting development in our day-to-day life, to be able to be clear about what type of development the city wants to see, and where there is an opening for a conversation about working with a developer to see that brought to market. In your own words, the things that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Don't happen to those.
Okay.
And coming
Josh?
back to the idea of the whole restaurant, unfortunately, generally, if you redevelop a downtown building, you put in a restaurant, the increase in valuation generally is not that much money. And it's not, the taxes that are currently paid on it are paid.
And again, Mr. Jeffers, I think it's not just about TIFs. So I hear you stating really clearly that there's a number of ways in which we cannot use a TIF to incentivize certain development, and I'm hoping what you're hearing me say is that we would like to have a conversation about ways to incentivize other types of development where the TIF is not the only thing in our toolbox.
And you said where I was heading. We are having those conversations. And it's getting enough capital this is what my son-in-law does to my daughter.
No, I'm just like, when you say we, is it we? Because I think the conversation that you're hearing from some of us is, that is a conversation we, the planning board, would like to have with staff and potentially in a joint session with city council, because they have brought so many things forward that I think indicate a pattern of what they would like to see for development in the city.
Josh, one last question.
One of the things that didn't show up on the TIFs, and I'm pretty sure Sophia's house received a TIF, correct?
It did. Honestly, I was late getting it to these guys, and it was like a 5-year TIF.
That's fine. It's just an illustration. When you're talking about setting like a dollar amount cap, right? And you're like, it's not really worth it if the TIF isn't $2 million, right? If it's something that's going to make our community safer or improve our quality of life, it's something to think about, whether or not it's a TIF or not, right? Like if somebody's like, I'm going to open a business right here, and I'm going to put in a touch-and-go light, and I need to offset the price of that. Things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a TIF, but in order to make sure that the improvements, again, that the city is constrained because of the fact that we just don't have the tax base, we want to still encourage those improvements. And so,
yeah, no, I'm pleased that you recognize Sophia's house was not included. It was truly a matter of running out of time. In a nutshell, it was a 5-year TIF, and it was a matter of they're a non-taxable entity. They really needed help in the early days ramping up. So rather than saying we're going to hit you with taxes because of the structure of the tax credits, which was one of the ways they put their financing together, they were going to become a taxable entity. They really couldn't afford it, so the council said, the negotiation back and forth was, we'll give you a pass for those first 5 years. Taxes, the tax credits expire, they could then become truly a nonprofit, so at the end of the day, they won't pay taxes on that building. That's why it was structured. It was a pretty unique one, but we did want to see it happen. That was also my conversations with developers. It's not just about the money. Sometimes it's about creating jobs. Sometimes it's about improving the image of the community, what's going to help transform it. So it's a multifaceted return on investment is what I ask the council to consider. Again, I'm not the guy who makes these decisions. I just sort of package them, work with council to see what they want, but try to point out the opportunities. Having a downtown TIF that will, something that'll do housing, that all of a sudden we've got people living downtown who will go to the coffee shops, go to the bars, go to the restaurants.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Do we have any other business? The only other business I see is reading of the motion to adopt the January 30th minutes. Do I have a motion? Josh? Do I have a second? Michael?
I just have a question. This is the one where you had some notes on changes, right?
Yeah, I made a few changes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I read
Right,
that.
and then Linda sent them back out with the changes.
Yeah, okay.
And she had corrected. It was, I nitpick, I'm sorry.
I appreciate it.
I tend to do that, so we've got a motion, and a second. All those in favor? Motion to adjourn?
Jeez, blue enthusiasm here.
Just real quick, which is, we can, but my address has changed. Should I email you, Linda, with a new address?
Are you still in the same ward?
Yeah, I moved up the block. I'm at 189 Summer Street. So,
You changed season.
well, I brought season with me. That's my wife.
Yes, I know.
I've also shared with HR.
Perfect, thank you.
So was today's conversation the start of a second conversation? I know a couple have asked that, but is there a future agenda item to talk about the type of development we'd like to incentivize or areas of development and have an exchange of thought?
Is that something you want on the planning board agenda for the planning board to discuss? Or is that a request to get on a joint meeting with the council as you suggested? Like, what would the board like to do?
I would propose we discuss it before we try to take the city council's time, and that it would be a discussion with staff.
Yeah, maybe on a meeting where we don't have a heavy agenda. You could add it to our, and we can start, you guys can bring up some stuff and we can bring up some stuff.
And what sort of stuff would you like us to bring up? Is this a request that the staff would put together, another memo with suggested alternatives to TIFs, or is
I don't
this
think it
an
needs to be
open
all that.
discussion
No,
for the
I think
board
it's an
to
open
discuss?
discussion. And I think that you've done some amazing work already in the buckets. We've got things from city council. I mean, I think it's starting to take those pieces and say, what are the things we feel like are missing? What are the things the public says every friggin' time they're in here in a public hearing that they're saying, we need more of this? How can we have a proactive conversation about what we see, both the public and us seeing a demand for, and have that conversation?
Okay.
And I think a lot of that's in the buckets that has already come from city council. I think a lot of that is some of the things that you have already had some discussion around, both as staff and through that kind of second stage conversation with city council.
Okay. Our next scheduled meeting is the 27th, and then we have a joint workshop with the city council to review the draft Riverfront Island Master Plan on the 28th. So we're going to be busy 2 nights.
Thank you for that reminder, yeah. So that will be a presentation from the consultant to both boards. That will be really the one time the consultant is presenting this information to the boards, and then based on comment, they'll be finalizing it, and we'll get the final product a few weeks later. So one thought, maybe this is something for the planning board to think, and we can discuss at the next meeting, if it would be helpful to have this discussion that you're talking about in a more informal format where we actually break into groups and do our own little mini workshop as the planning board on that topic. Okay.
Yes, that would be good.
That sounds fantastic.
I think that sounds good. All right. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. See you on the 27th.
Thank you.
But don't write another memo for it. Right, like, it's just a conversation, can we just have a conversation?
Sorry, Linda.
Okay. I'm looking for a trash can.